What is the nature of God? According to Christians, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent. But I think there are problems with this account, and it revolves around the fact that Satan was created by God, and Satan turned out to be evil. So, first of all, if God didn't know Satan would be evil, then he's not omniscient. He should have known that Satan would be evil. So something's very strange there. Or the second possibility is that God knew Satan would be evil, therefore he's not benevolent, because why would he create someone purposefully who he knew was going to be evil, and then effect the destruction of mankind, who he later created? The third point is possibly God knew Satan would be evil, but he felt lonely and in need of a companion, which is very strange, because if someone's omnipotent, surely he wouldn't need that. With regard to the first point, we may say that perhaps God suspected that Satan would be evil, but he hoped that he wouldn't be, which is kind of worrying really for an omniscient God, because you'd think that he would be able to see exactly what's going to happen. Now you may use this as a counter to determinism, which is equally worrying, the fact that everything is predestined, as it were, but it's not very convincing as a kind of justification of God allowing Satan to be evil. With regard to the second point, which is that God knew Satan was going to be evil, and therefore doesn't really do much for his benevolence, it's quite problematic, because from a Christian perspective, the notion of grace or salvation effectively becomes a kind of power trip for God, because what we're saying is that God knew that Satan would be evil and therefore tempt Adam and Eve and effect the fall, and so salvation is really just a way for God to kind of show his power, which really for someone who is omnipotent is quite strange. I mean, this kind of suggests that God has a kind of insecurity complex, as it were. Now, the third possibility was that God created Satan knowing he would be evil, but he just felt lonely. So what we see here is God surrounding himself with a heavenly host, and importantly here it's in his own image. And what I kind of see here is God creating a tribe in a very similar manner to the way humans interact. So what we're doing is applying very human attributes to God, and also not only does God want companionship, but he also establishes himself as the leader of the pack, which is also something humans kind of intrinsically desire. We want power, and God is a kind of the ultimate embodiment of that. Incidentally, joining God's crowd puts you higher up in the rank of kind of the ethereal tribe, as it were. So on that reading, God operates on a very human level. So possibly God is insecure and callous, and moreover has a sadomasochistic streak, which is not very godlike. This is evident A, through the way he has allowed pain to come to humanity by creating Satan and therefore allowing evil to introduce itself. Moreover, what's interesting is that Adam and Eve must have had a proclivity towards being interested in the prohibited, otherwise they wouldn't have listened to what the serpent said. It's all very well to say that Adam and Eve just sinned, they chose, that's the original sin. But the fact is, on a psychological basis, God has actually configured their brains such that they have a tendency towards doing something which other people wouldn't have, because there are some people you could put in the Garden of Eden, and it's quite probable that they wouldn't have eaten the apple. But then again, humanity is by definition and of necessity curious, so it's probable that most people would. That's not our fault, it's just genetics. However, the second point is that God sent down a part of himself, his incarnation, as it were, his avatar to earth, to suffer incredible pain, which he could have avoided by not creating Satan. This is fascinating. So, which shows a kind of masochism on God's part. But then again, it's a very interesting form of masochism, because on the one hand it is God, but then again we see in the Bible that Jesus appeals to God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And God doesn't save him then. if God was omnipotent, why does Jesus really need to suffer for the benefit of mankind? God is obeying his own rules. Who put the rules in place? God. Who made the whole system, the infrastructure wherein all this takes place? God. Did it need to happen? Well, we'll never know. This leads to my main point, that the Judeo-Christian God is all too human, and has actually regressed in some ways from Plato's modification of the Greek gods, because Plato went for this kind of idealized, perfect God, who was just kind of an abstract figure, as opposed to the Zeus and Hera, Aphrodite, etc., etc. But the Christian God has almost regressed in a way, and has a much more kind of character to him. A God who makes lesser mortals in his own image, but completely dominates them. A God who wants attention. In short, there are a lot of ways in which the Christian God is quite flawed, but that is why he's so appealing. Primarily because an abstract God is so hard to relate to. Why is it that happy clappy Christians chant Jesus, Jesus, Jesus in their kind of big tents, not God, 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 while kind of psyching themselves up with this kind of rousing Christian anthems, praise Jesus, all this kind of thing. Anyway, they are praising the corporeal God, and it's a kind of Jesus, there's actually a song, Jesus is my friend, I think, which precisely kind of captures the modern Christianity. That's what it's about. Christians want a friend, an omnipotent friend, moreover, but a friend. And I think they're trying to have their cake and eat it from this respect, because being someone who's a friend also is necessarily flawed, so that you can relate to them. This is what Christians want to do by having Jesus as a corporeal kind of incarnation of God coming down to earth, being amongst humans. And in fact we can see in the Bible Jesus actually gets angry, remember, in the market, and he kind of throws the stools over and stuff. If he hadn't done that, he wouldn't really have had much character. And then also the suffering he felt on the cross was all too real. I mean, Jesus was a human, but before that, all we had was this kind of abstract God who we could only really feel awe or terror for, and that's not something very appealing. And I think that's why now Christianity kind of has any power at all left, because it kind of advocates Jesus as someone you can relate to, which in our kind of modern kind of sphere of personal insecurity is something very appealing. However, in the same move, they have condemned their God to having the same flaw as us, incidentally the same flaw that we're kind of trying to appease. We're natural, social beings, and we've applied this to God such that he can be part of our social infrastructure. Otherwise, how can we connect to him? Now, there are ultimately two answers to this. Either one, God does not exist, or number two, the Christian God does not exist. Now, I'm not going to argue against one, because I don't think you can ever conclusively prove that a God does not exist, and it may well be probable that there is some kind of creative force in the universe or outside of the universe, I don't know. It may be that there is some omnipotent being who manages affairs, who created the universe, gave order and structure, whatever else you want to say, and maybe he does actually have affairs in human life, I don't know. It could be that he's involved in miracles, there could be a kind of supernatural element to that, we're never going to be sure. However, my main concern is to say there's no good reason to suppose that the Christian religion is more apposite than that of deism. And I think it's just, quite ironically, more approachable than deism, because it's something we can relate to. And the irony is that in being more approachable, it's also quite self-defeating. What is the nature of God we will never know. It could well be that he is benevolent, and omnipotent, and omniscient. However, it does not mean he has been involved in human affairs in the way we have said he has been. I mean, this being could exist in the universe, and it may be that the greater good of the universe obviously takes precedent in the only way that it could do over kind of the petty human affairs that we have. So I think that Christianity is ultimately quite flawed.